Ever find yourself waiting endlessly at a big box pharmacy, feeling like just another number? At Tablet Pharmacy, they provide the personalized service you deserve. They offer free delivery and blister packaging options to make managing your medications easier than ever. Check their competitive prices online at tabletpharmacy.ca.
Hello, friends. I am Cindy Thompson, and this is a Resilience Project. This is a space where stories are shared and possibilities are discovered. I invite you to partner with me in cultivating resilience among humans, one conversation at a time. I am so pleased to be speaking with Shannon Bergstrom about her journey as a perfectionist and people pleaser, and someone who is discovering that she actually has been enough all along. Shannon is a proud educator, wife, and mother. Sharing her story of childhood trauma and how this has manifested within her body, Shannon's story will be familiar to many. Find out what she has been learning and the role boundaries have played in her resilience practice. So Shannon, thank you for taking the time out today to be on a resilience project with me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
You know, when I think about meeting people and having them on as a guest, it just feels such a privilege to just sit in conversation and hear each person's story and what you have been learning about yourself and what you might like our listeners to be discovering today. And there may be some gems here that we can pull out to help others.
I think my story of resiliency is really based upon childhood trauma and how that has impacted myself, both physically and mentally and emotionally, and how I have had to work to learn to heal that through counseling, through learning how to set healthy boundaries, really find my own validation and worth, and really learn how to heal.
Beautiful. I mean, that's a great overview of what we're going to be tackling today. Sometimes we learn about ourselves as adults or later on in life on what we needed back when we were growing up, because our life is a cumulative experience from childhood all the way along. And I wonder if you would mind sharing what you've been learning about yourself as you reflect back. And maybe if you want to start with some of those early experiences in losing your sister and how that impacted yourself and your family.
Yes. Before I begin to share a little bit about my family's journey, I just want to give an acknowledgement to my parents. I absolutely have a lot of love and respect for my parents, and I want to acknowledge and recognize that they absolutely did the best that they could with what they were able to do at that time. And I have been fortunate enough to be able to really heal and repair a lot of the relationships with them as an adult. So I'm really grateful for that experience.
Beautiful.
I grew up as the middle child in a family of 5, and I always thought I had a pretty normal and happy childhood. It wasn't really until later in life that my trauma really caught up with me, and I was forced to really deal with that and heal from that. I never really knew at the time how much that was impacting me and who I was really becoming. I grew up in what could be a fairly chaotic and at times volatile situation. And I think I learned early on, especially as that middle child, to be the peacemaker. It was very important for me that everyone was happy, and I internalized that a lot. I very much am an empath, and I'm always have been a very highly sensitive person. And by highly sensitive, I mean that. Like, I really absorb the energy of other people. I really take on a lot, and it affects me deeply when other people around me are struggling. And I always want to make that better for them. And I think that started for me quite young.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think many listeners may not realize there actually are a number of people out there who are very highly sensitive. And there are some great books on the highly sensitive child, the highly sensitive person. And I think that's really nice to acknowledge that, because that also sets the stage for how you experienced your world as well, and still do.
Yes. And then at age 11, my sister died. And that, of course, tore our whole family apart.
How did she die, Shannon?
She was 5 years old at the time of her passing, almost 6. She had had some kidney problems and kind of immune system problems, but really was a healthy overall child. She wasn't unwell. So her passing was quite sudden. She contracted a virus essentially, and her immune system wasn't strong enough to combat. So her passing itself was quite sudden. And at 11 years old, I was kind of at that age where I definitely was old enough to understand what was going on. But also in some ways, I guess I had the innocence of being able to compartmentalize what was happening. Of course, at that time, the emotional capacity that my parents had for me was very, very minimal. Of course, again, they did the best they could. Certainly I was cared for, I was loved, but I was just kind of there. And I was very fortunate enough to have positive supports within my extended family, certainly my school setting, my friends and their families. So I really had a lot of supports externally outside of my home. And I think then that too really started to kind of build this need for external validation. I wasn't able to receive that validation or support within my family group. So it was through those relationships externally that I was able to get what I really needed.
Well, and it speaks to, it takes a community to help raise a child. And in particular, in a loss, your parents would have just been devastated and trying to just navigate their way through that as well. But it's a really strong point to recognize what the other kids in the family need at that time and the support you would have needed also.
Yeah, and I think my older brother had a very different experience. He had just started high school, so his community was really new. And that in itself has really created, I think, different journeys for both of us regarding our trauma. Something I've learned through counseling is that although we experience the same experiences, the way that we experience those is very different. And like I said, I was very lucky to have the support system I had. And I think that really contributed to the resiliency I was able to find during that really, really difficult time.
Do you think it also informed you that you can rely on others, you can reach out and ask for help? Did that also give you that sense that it doesn't have to just be your parents or one person, it could be others that bring that support for you?
Yeah, very much. And I think it was a very safe space for me to do so. I was always able to talk about my sister, talk about my experiences. That was never something I felt I needed to internalize. I also kind of in that following year began some grief counseling. That was kind of my first experience with counseling. I did that both like one-on-one or with my mom, as well as I joined kind of a support group for kids who'd either lost a sibling or a parent. And my family built up a really strong connection with the Compassionate Friends Network, which is a group for bereaved parents and families. So I, from a young age, had a very positive relationship with counseling.
I think that's beautiful that your parents knew that they couldn't navigate this without that support and that they needed to find a way through this. There's no roadmap on that, is there? And we just need to figure it out along the way. So I love that they introduced you to counseling at that time.
Yeah. So I think for the next few years, I was able to kind of maintain a pretty status quo life. Again, I really spent a lot of time outside of my home, I think, with my friends. And it really wasn't until the age of 15 or age 16 that trauma really caught up with me and started manifesting physically in my body.
Okay. How did it show up?
I began to vomit every day. And of course, that was a very stressful time because we were concerned of any medical needs. Looking back now, I do believe that was the kind of the way that my anxiety or my trauma was really trying to release. I think it had been pent up for many, many years. And almost I felt like in the years following my sister's passing, both my parents went into deep depression. And it was almost like there was never any room for me to live in that. And maybe it caught up with me.
Well, hearing a little bit about just your sensitivity, like you suggested, it was almost like you were taking care of everybody and trying to be that good girl or that girl that kept things easy and not caused any difficulty. But as a teenager, that's the time where adolescents are often pushing back and individuating. And I can hear you almost went inside and internalized a lot of what was going on.
I think so. And it really became kind of a vicious cycle of guilt and anxiety because I always loved going to school. I've always had a positive relationship with school. Of course, I'm an educator now. So it wasn't that school was the issue. It was that I was unwell and I didn't know how to name that. And I unfortunately didn't end up graduating with my class. And that created a lot of guilt and shame for me because, again, I was always a good girl.
Interesting. I appreciate your sharing that and just how physically that was interfering with your ability just to do all of those milestones.
Yeah. And again, I had really good support systems within my friends and their families. And I was really lucky for that time. They really took me under their wing. And I think when I did graduate and then eventually started university, that kind of gave me a clean slate. And I was kind of able to move forward. I don't know that I really did a lot of healing at that time, but I think that I was able to move forward and move on.
At what point did it get better? What point did you figure out how to navigate the nauseousness and the anxiety associated with the stress?
I don't know that I really necessarily did. I think that became very normalized for me. And so then I just had to cope with experience and I just had to carry on. I did try antidepressants for a period of time, but of course I wasn't really struggling with depression. So that wasn't really the answer for me. And again, I think that really clean slate of starting university and starting again. And also within that, I got a lot of external validation again, right? I was back to being the good girl. I was on the right path. I was doing the right things. I was entering the College of Education, which was so exciting for me. I've always wanted to be a teacher. So I started kind of getting that bucket filled a lot more. And I think that maybe had something to do with it.
Okay. Yeah. So how did this then lead to your discovering more about yourself as an adult?
Yeah. So I think those relationships that I had within my family of always being that peacemaker really carried forth into adulthood. My parents had divorced back when I was an early teenager, but I always maintained a really close relationship with both of my parents. My dad specifically, I've always kind of been a daddy's girl. And my dad struggles very deeply with depression. His is quite seasonal, very seasonal. You almost just know it's October. And because he didn't have the relationship with my mom anymore, I think I took on this idea of having to be his caregiver. And I was absorbing a lot of his own unhealthy behaviors, and I was taking that on as my job to fix. So that is when I returned to my relationship with counseling.
Yeah, you just naturally draw to that caretaker role, don't you?
Very much so. Yeah, that is very much who I am. So not surprising that I've become a teacher. And within my friends and my family, I think that's a role that I very much easily step into, which in ways is really good, but it comes at a cost for me as well.
Yeah. As you return to counseling, I really appreciate that you have highlighted the importance of that role in your life because I, of course, advocate for people to get counseling. And at different stages, we might need different things. So the fact that you had an early experience with counseling and a good one, that then allowed you to have the comfort level perhaps to reach out again at different stages and realize my current coping is not really necessarily the healthiest.
Yeah. And oddly enough, I actually reached out to my childhood counselor. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to find a counselor. Jeanette's been a guest on your podcast, and I reached out to her, and I knew I didn't need grief counseling per se, but little did I know that still all that trauma built up really was impacting me. So I did need that more than I recognized at the time. So I began seeing my counselor again. And really at that time, I had to kind of first explore the idea of boundaries, which was completely foreign to me. I've always been someone to say yes, 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 yes. Yes, I can do that. Yes, I can take that on. Yes, I can be that person, more and more and more. And I loved it. I was so fueled by being such a yes person that the idea of saying no felt just absolutely foreign. It was devastating to me to have to explore this idea of no.
Yeah.
I never knew that.
What stands out for me, Shannon, is we often worry about the people that might be showing signs of depression and withdrawing. We worry about the people who might be, as adolescents, acting out because, developmentally, it can look different as a teenager versus an adult. Seldom do we worry about the yes people. Seldom do we worry about the people that are over functioning.
Yes.
And yet it's just as harmful to that person to be that yes person and people pleaser all the time. That perfectionism, it's not healthy on our bodies and on our minds in terms of ongoing coping. Do you want to speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, it wasn't until kind of my 30s that I started exploring a little bit more back into my childhood trauma. And I realized how much that yes dynamic is such a trauma-based response. I always had a nervous system running high. And for me, that became very normal. But for my body, that became very harmful. And I, in my late 20s, had my son. And I was working as a teacher. And again, surprise, surprise, of course, I had to be the best teacher with the most amazing lessons and connections with my families. And of course, that empath in me absorbed every single ounce of my students' lives. And I worked with some families that were in themselves experiencing a lot of trauma. And my nature was to go to them, to support them, to give them all of me. And then I was a new mom, and I don't think I realized that I needed to make some shifts. I didn't have necessarily the same capacity for others that I've maybe once had, but God forbid I say no. I had to still keep running a mile a minute and doing all the things and being the best. And I loved it. No part of me felt unhappy. It was very natural for me. It was truly authentic. But it was so unhealthy. And at age 31, my body said no. I got ill with a virus, and it truly was the virus that took me down. But I do believe that my body really just was so depleted without me even recognizing that I wasn't able to repair and to reheal.
Our bodies do have a way of informing us, don't they?
Yes, they do.
And we may think it's something else, but like you did, I really appreciate you did that work to discover, what am I really needing here? What does my body need? And often in counseling, we are really getting people to listen to their bodies because we can separate out. Your head had a whole other plan just to keep controlling all these things and navigating and being the best that you can be at everything. But your body had a whole other agenda that really needed you to pay attention to.
Yes, and I think I was in denial still for a long period of time. I just thought that I could take a few weeks off work. I could rest. In fact, I was trying to plan a Christmas concert from my bed. Like I said, I went from moving 1,000,000 miles a minute to I couldn't walk up a flight of stairs. And I was a healthy 31-year-old woman. I was in denial for a long time about the messages that my body was giving me. I just thought, okay, I'm sick. I'm just going to rest and then I'll get right back to it. And I did. I returned back to work part-time. I still, wanted to be on the committees. I wanted to plan my son the best birthday parties, throw the most beautiful baby showers. I still, once again, continue to take on all of those roles that externally validated me. And at the cost of my body, no doubt. I wasn't listening. My body would tell me no. And I would push past because I could do it. And if I couldn't do it, then who was I anymore? And that was really where I had to dig deep because my body told me I couldn't do those things anymore. And I didn't know where my worth lied anymore. if I couldn't be the best teacher, if I couldn't be the best mom, if I couldn't be the best friend, who was I? And that was a really deep journey for me to do a lot of unlearning of who I thought I needed to be and really realizing that who I am is good enough. And it's great. And it's actually better than it used to be.
That is awesome. Really to identify, it's not what we do that defines us. It's who we be, your values, your character. And I'm imagining that's what you really had to get down to. Who is Shannon without all of the perfectionism and needing to navigate all that control around you?
Yeah, and I think understanding how I had to show up in life might look a little bit different, but that didn't make me any less of a person. I was very fortunate enough that although I had to really start setting these limits and boundaries of what I was able to do, I learned I didn't really lose a lot. I didn't lose friendships. I now am able to be back in the classroom after kind of a long struggle with regaining my strength to do that. I think that I'm a better teacher than ever. I have great relationships with my family members. So I think for overall, although the journey has been really hard, the outcome has been really positive. And I think that when it comes to setting boundaries now feels amazing and empowering. And I always want to shout it to the rooftops that you can say no and you don't have to feel bad about it.
I love that. I think so many of us could be reminded of that. I am curious, what did that do for some of the relationships around you as you learned to say no, as you learned to set boundaries? Tell me what happened with those that care about you in your friendships, relationships, family. Did that have an impact on that aspect of your life?
In my friendships, definitely not. It was really positive. I think my friends could see how hard it was for me to decline an invitation for dinner, how hard it was for me to cancel things. And part of my coping was I just started saying maybe, maybe. It gave me the power to not feel bad about canceling, but it wasn't making a commitment. Then I also would feel bad for breaking. So maybe kind of was my halfway point. Maybe I can do that. I'll see how I feel. And my friends were wonderful and they were so appreciative. See you when we see you. Miss you if you're not there. We love you. In my family, it was a little harder because they were used to one way of me being. And especially when it came to understanding the energy and emotional capacity that I was able to take on from other people, that was a big shift because I loved being the listener. I loved being the person that people came to for guidance. I got a lot of validation out of that. But I was learning that I didn't have the capacity. I couldn't take on other people's problems, and I certainly couldn't fix them. That was a bit difficult for, I think, certain people. Here I was, I used to be the person you could call anytime. And now I'm saying, no, I can't.
Well, and you were doing all this work and this transformation was happening within you. So then the ripples start to show up in the people around you. It's almost like you have to teach them what you've been learning. And there's some really kind ways to do that by even just saying, hey, this is what I'm learning about myself, that when I say yes to everything, my body can't handle that. And I don't want to be that person anymore. So there can be a kind way of sharing that with others that isn't just pushing back, but just to help them understand where you're going with this and why.
Very much. And I've always been very open about my counseling relationship. And I've always been a big promoter that everyone should have a healthy relationship with counseling. It should never be something that someone is ashamed of. In fact, I talk with my students about it frequently, that counseling is something that I need to be healthy. And just like we need food to nourish our bodies and physical activity, I need counseling as a way to keep my mind and my heart balanced and healthy. So I think that people were really aware that I was taking this journey. And like I said, it wasn't easy. At first, it felt I had a lot of guilt over creating these boundaries. I truly did. But the more I did it and then I started seeing those positive benefits, it became a lot easier for me. And I think in some ways, I hope that I was planting seeds for the other people around me to realize, hey, you can do this too. And if more of us all learn how to do this, I think we'll all be a lot happier and healthier.
Absolutely. So you were modeling it for others also, as you saw those around you, maybe in friends, that perhaps I can share this message about what I'm excited about and what I'm learning. Some of the fear, however, is that those friends, that family may not be there for me. If I start to say no, if I start to set boundaries, that can be a big fear for people. How did you navigate that?
I think having the confidence that I knew I was doing what was right for me. And so for the first time in my life, I really was putting myself first, where in the past I'd always put myself last. And so I think because I truly knew that this is what I needed, I had the conviction to be able to carry forth. And for me, like I said, I had a really good support system in doing that. That might not be the case for everybody, but then I guess that would ask me to take pause of inventory of who it is in your life. And if people really want to truly support you and your wellness, then I believe they'll get on board. And it's challenging. It may take time. I know for my dad, that was very, very, very hard. But, looking back years later, I think he does see how our relationship is so much better the way it is now with the boundaries in place than it was then.
It's about the long game. It's about trusting in time. People will get to see that we're okay. They'll get to see that you are still Shannon. You are still there for them, just not in the same capacity. And that allows them to see that you can still be a listener, but just not give everything of yourself, and to decide when and if you can be that listener, or when and if you can be available to people.
Absolutely. I still very much am the same person. I just don't allow it to affect me or compound in the way that I think I used to. Setting boundaries can still be hard for me. I had to do one yesterday that was very difficult. I had to speak up and really share my truth. I knew that the recipient didn't want to hear that, and it was difficult for them. But I also realized that's not for me to take on. And that was a big lesson also. I can't affect the way the other people are going to respond. That's up to them, and that's not for me to hold responsibility in.
And that takes intention, doesn't it? To actually remind yourself of that, because as somebody who's highly sensitive, you are reading the face on that person. You are recognizing the disappointment or maybe even hurt as you deliver your boundary. And I often think about boundaries as something that we're asking people, even if they don't understand our boundary, to respect it. And it's okay that they don't understand what your boundary is, but that it's important to you.
Yes, I agree, because we're all different people, and what we're all have the capacity for may be different. And I think also those who don't know how to understand boundaries also probably aren't setting them themselves. And therefore, they may have a bit of an unhealthy dynamic with that concept. And so it can feel very difficult because, how dare you? How dare you say no to that? Or, I just thought you would say yes because you're such a pleaser, right? But I can still please people and make other people happy, but it shouldn't be at the cost of my own wellness. And I think that's been the big shift for me.
Yeah. What we're pulling out here is that we can be the person in one way as we're learning. And you're being a listener by your being so ever present to so many and wanting everybody to like you, to be happy with you. You were looking for that external approval. And that can also draw a number of people to us in our lives that are looking for somebody to be that yes person who will do all of that and overfunction. That is a learning process as well. But I think of it like a tank or a reserve. As you kept giving so much of yourself away, that empties you out. And I have in my office this big jar of beans. And I often use it, particularly with women, because I do think, in fairness, we are socialized in that way to be a bit more of a pleaser and to be nice and to be kind. So in this jar of beans, I think of if we dump that out and pour it out to everybody, we have nothing left. And that jar is really easy to be tipped over. But if we hang on to what we need as well and find a balance in that, in the things that we do for others, that fills our jar back up, whether it's volunteering or being available to a friend to assess, does that fill me up as well? Am I also feeling good about this commitment and this relationship? I'm very visual that way, so that's how I kind of think of it. But as you tell your story, I can hear how you are learning to keep your reservoir filled up as well.
Yeah, and it's a very fine, complicated dance for me because truly the things that do fill my jar are also at times the things that deplete my jar. So for me, again, doing those great things for other people or showing up in ways that make other people feel good is the person I want to be. But I'm learning to make sure that I have the energy and the space for that. It can't come at any cost. I think it didn't matter to me. I was willing to do it no matter what in the past. And now I'm really trying to listen to myself and understand differently and recognize differently. Why am I feeling the need to do that? Tuning in a little bit more about checking myself, reminding myself a little bit more that no, you don't have the space for that right now, and that's okay.
If you had highly sensitive people listening to this, and they may not know definitively that they're a highly sensitive person, but there's a lot they might be hearing about themselves in your story, what would you want them to know?
I think, first of all, that we don't have to change who we are. I'm always going to be that empathetic person, and I love that about me. That's one of my best qualities. But also really tuning into how does that serve me? And how do I make sure that I show up in the best way with that? And if that isn't serving you in a path that's helpful and healthy, really taking the time and making sure you were replenishing yourself, because the work of empaths is very hard. And really connecting with, again, how that serves us and how we can ensure that that is serving us first before we serve others.
Excellent. And it's a reminder also, this is an ongoing journey. This isn't a one-shot deal. You went to counseling when you were younger after the loss of your sister, and you would have processed some work there, more around your grief likely. But then to realize later on in life, 15, 16, when your body is telling you there's something not okay here, it's a reminder that we have to pay attention to those cues. It's a reminder that we may pop into, do some more work along the way as we learn more, because it's hard to tackle everything at one time.
Absolutely. And like I said, I thought I had a fairly happy childhood with just some bad things happen. That's truly how I always looked at it. And it wasn't until I really did some deep, deep work through counseling that I was really able to understand how much that impact had on me. And I continue to do counseling. I enjoy counseling with my husband if need be. I do counseling to bring balance to my work as an educator. I believe everyone should do it. I think it can be really intimidating. I think people look at this idea of how do you just sit and talk to a stranger? But my hopes is when you find the right person, they're not a stranger. I've been fortunate enough to now know my counselor for almost 20 years, and she's a very important person in my life, and we have a really good relationship. So I truly hope that for everyone, that they could find someone that they can connect with.
That's the hope, isn't it? That you have that connection, that you can pop in from time to time with that person again and know that you don't have to start at ground zero. You are picking up and they already have a good sense of who you are and what you've been working on.
Yeah. And I might go every week for a period of time, or I might go 6 months in between visits. But I always know that that's a really safe space that I can do some work and some healing. And it can be challenging and exhausting, but in the end, it really has been just an immense tool for me. I'm super grateful for it.
I really appreciate that message, Shannon. And I think what I love about your story is that you see this as an ongoing journey, that through our lives, we are always learning about ourselves and what we needed at 12 or 15 or in our 20s or 31 when you hit a wall as a teacher. It's okay to see it as an ongoing experience of learning about ourselves. What do I need now? What's important to me right now? If we were to sort of define a little bit your resiliency toolkit, I can hear counseling as being a really important part, boundaries, being able to say no. What else would you say is important for your resiliency?
Having a really great support system, and how that might be different. Of course, in my earlier years, or my immediate family certainly wasn't able to be that support system. So for me, that was with my friendships, my extended family, whoever it is. You need to build your community, and a community that's behind you and support you, and letting go of the guilt. That has been a big lesson I have had to learn, because of course, sure, I can set the boundary, but actually feeling okay about that was a whole different ball game. So letting go of the guilt and caring for myself before I care for others.
So what have you built into your self-care toolkit? Can I ask?
I'm a talker, so I really feel that communicating and letting things out is really helpful for me. So whether that's through counseling or conversations with loved ones, journaling. I certainly love walking, and the peace and the quietness of going for a nice walk, kind of connecting with nature is helpful. Working a little bit still on meditation. It's hard for me to quiet my mind and body. That's something that I'm practicing. And also I'm trying to pay it forward as an educator and really start to instill some of these healthy habits with my students, because I think, again, we don't really learn these things as a child. We think of healthy as healthy foods or getting exercise, but I don't think there's a lot of focus on our mental health or in our emotional health. I think that if we could learn these things a little earlier in life about how to tune in with ourselves and understand where our actions are based out of, where our response is based out of, I'm hoping that I can pay that forward with my kids at school and give them some of the tools that I wish I maybe would have had younger.
Which is wonderful, because I know I've been talking to some other folks on the show, like Kirk Austin, around resilience in kids, and the importance of being able to help them calm their minds is also going to help them learn. So I have no doubt you're going to bring a lot of gifts that you can then share, even in moments with your kids, and still trying to meet the curriculum needs, but being able to dial in and notice when one of your children are struggling emotionally, and to give them some tools. And I know our daughter's even doing that as a teacher as well, and having spots to just go in that corner and breathe, or go to this section and this is what you do for mindfulness over here. And that creates some gifts for our kids to help them cope more effectively and calm their minds. So I'm glad you're doing that.
Thank you. I'm really grateful for the opportunity that I have to share that with my students.
It's a gift to them, I'm sure. Shannon, anything else that you hope to share with our listeners today?
I think just that communicating that the journey is hard. It certainly is hard, and it's ongoing, but we need to care for ourselves first. We can't pour from an empty bucket. And I think for so many of us, especially women, that becomes very normalized. And I think we need to really start unpacking that isn't normal and that isn't healthy. And it's likely not serving you in ways that are working. So to tune in a little bit more with how to care for yourself, and that's okay. That's okay to put ourselves first. And it's okay to set a boundary, because we need that. And that's part of caring for ourselves first.
Great message. I'm so glad that you have been here today to share your story, to be vulnerable with us on what you've been learning about yourself. And this is the real people stories. We are all dealing with something. And maybe to summarize what you just said also is to acknowledge what we are currently doing may be familiar, but to do the work to make those changes and learn something different may feel hard. But when you really hold them up against one another, what is really harder in the long run, to continue what we have been doing or learn to actually fill your cup, set those boundaries, and eventually have more of a reservoir for ourselves?
Yeah. And it's hard, but it's not as hard as it used to be. It's a lot easier now. And I have a lot more confidence in doing that now. And I guess, the more we practice that, the easier it becomes. And that becomes my new normal now. And that feels really good.
What a beautiful spot to park this today. What a great conversation. I'm so grateful that you would be here with us, Shannon, and I wish you the best in your continued practice. And I am so glad that you could be here to just acknowledge the importance of resilience in these ways.
Thank you so much, Cindy.
My pleasure. For those of you who are familiar with Dr. Gabor Mate's book, When the Body Says No, Shannon's story is one example of what can happen when we ignore the physical manifestations of stress in our bodies. It's a wonderful reminder that our bodies are talking to us all the time. In this conversation, Shannon is shining a light on the importance of caring for yourself before caring for others. As a highly sensitive person, she intuitively found a way to navigate conflict, sacrificing her own well-being in an attempt to keep others happy. To highlight some of the key ingredients in Shannon's resilience practice, I really pulled out the piece around learning to let go of guilt when she needs to say no, and in some cases it might even be a maybe. Secondly, teaching people what she needs and asking them to respect her boundaries even if they do not understand it. Thirdly, building a strong support system that will love you unconditionally and celebrate your value. Her encouragement to see this as a practice that gets easier over time reminds us that hard work does pay off. As is the case for many of my guests, finding a counselor that can help you gain the tools as you work through healing is important. Again, try to be patient with yourself. As in Shannon's case, it was building her resilience at various stages of development, and when she was ready to tackle another aspect of her work, she did so. If you are a self-proclaimed perfectionist or people pleaser, my question for you is to assess, how is this serving you today? What is the scariest thing that might happen if you begin saying no to a few more things? And finally, who are the people in your life that will be there to support you? As in the words of Dr. Gabor Mate, when we have been prevented from learning how to say no, our bodies may end up having to say it for us. I'm wondering, what has your body been saying? Thank you for listening to this episode of A Resilience Project. We would not be doing this podcast without you. If you or someone you know has an inspirational story or is helping to build resilience in their community, please email me at cindy@aresilienceproject.com. In fact, email me either way. I would love to hear from you. My hope is to feature an episode periodically on your letters of resilience. I'm very interested in hearing your story of how you have tackled hard things and what worked for you. With your permission, I hope to share some of these stories along the way with our listeners. Also, check out my website, aresilienceproject.com, to learn more about our amazing guests. Your presence here is important because together we are cultivating a village of resilient individuals. You are creating a space for their stories to be shared and a sacred space for learning to occur. I also have a favor. I would love for you to go to your preferred podcast platform, rate and review the podcast so that we will know how we're doing. I also would like to express my gratitude to the amazing team of volunteers that have jumped on board to support this project. You will find each of those beautiful people on my website on the team page. As you go about this week, I invite you to think about one way that you can continue to grow your resilient muscle. What is one thing you can start with today? See you next week.
Ever find yourself waiting endlessly at a big box pharmacy, feeling like just another number? At Tablet Pharmacy, they provide the personalized service you deserve. They offer free delivery and blister packaging options to make managing your medications easier than ever. Check their competitive prices online at tabletpharmacy.ca